talks about all of the framers of the U.S. Constitution. Not just the main ones, but like 50 of them, all 50. This is a book that I am in the book club at the library, Star-Spangled Jesus. It is a personal perspective combination in a bigger framework about Christian nationalism. And she's on TikTok, April Joy. And then this book is fabulous. It's fascinating, easier to see the bias because there's less spin. And finished during Reagan's first term. The Lincoln's party was Republicans. Democrats were the opposite, and over time they switched. I'm going to tell you how that happens because there is some debate about that. So it started officially in the 1800s, right? But Lincoln's party, Republicans were progressive, anti-slavery, pro-strong federal government. It talks about that in here. And I've correlated it with other sources, but these are my main ones that are online. They wanted a big federal government, right? And then you have Democrats, and they were the party of states' rights, aka they used faith to defend slavery and segregation. And then they wanted small government. So 1930s and the 1960s. So starting in the 1930s with the Great Depression, Republicans had this thing called laissez-faire, and that was like, let the states do what they want, hands-off government. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a Democrat, and he was elected, and he was the one that put in all the federal programs like Social Security. That's when this switch happened it kind of slowly happened over the 30s to the 60s. There was a lot of progressive movements. Democrats became progressive. It started with the programs that started during the Depression. And then over time, people in the Democrat Party didn't like that, so they shifted to Republicans. So Republicans took advantage of that and like, hey, we're going to be for small government, states' rights, and we're going to start aligning with conservative Christians to enforce social morals, right? So modern Republicans to this day have since that time talked about restoring Judeo-Christian values. Democrats are more about fairness, personal freedom, and separation of church and state. But that's how it changed, okay? That's how it changed. What we learn in all three of these books is that our backbone of America as it was formed, it's important to understand the history. So we say faith and morality. It's basically Protestant Christianity. And it would be white Protestant Christianity, right, at the time. So it's still, faith has always been tied to national identity, and it's still tied to national identity. Education was used as a moral tool, especially of morality into our classrooms, and we still do it. Republicans back in the day, even one thing they did was they created land-grant colleges to help working folks have equality with the rich people who went to the elite colleges. It's amazing how Republican Party has changed because they all did the national parks, set aside the land for the national parks. Collective goals to individual focus, right? We no longer worked as a community as a focus. It was for individualism. Politics of faith shifted to everyone for themselves. You hear that thing about pull yourself by your own bootstraps. That was a joke back in the day. This isn't in the books, but I found it during my research because you literally couldn't do it. You literally couldn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So they joked, they'd be like, oh yeah, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They were being sarcastic. Government would impede with the natural progression. Not only would it impede people becoming better, but if you help them, you were enabling them. It also would impede kind of their destiny or whatever. Like, you're supposed to just let them work it out for themselves. And social Darwinism is kind of like, if you are rich or if you're well off, that's kind of where you belong. These other people belong here. People like me, you know, I'm kind of meant to be here. And if I can't get to where they are, it's my fault. So they don't see it as, they don't recognize that, oh, for example, Trump, for example, right? But a lot of these politicians and people who make a lot of money, they're like, oh, by the time he was 8, he was a millionaire because of all the money he got on his birthdays. Now, I don't think, like, if we're getting money on our birthdays, it's not going to equal for our kids $1 million by the time they're 8. So they don't see it as privilege. They just see it as, oh, that's just part of the social Darwinism system, and everybody will end up, and I deserve to be here. And then also, if they help, they're just enabling. Okay, they're just enabling you. They don't see it as, oh, we need these stepping stones to level the playing field. I do want to do a disclaimer. I'm not a member of a party, so I'm trying to be objective as possible. Obviously, I'm going to have some bias, but I have vetted this information to be as objective as possible. Okay, economic freedom was linked to virtue. Republicans called free markets more moral than government help, and they also saw it as more beneficial because it would be driven by supply and demand. And even today, some faith groups see wealth as having God's favor. The founders did to a certain degree, and I have a different video. If you want to know more about what the main framers of the Constitution believe, there's a main 6. I'm going to have a video linked to this, and we'll talk about what's in this book, what's true, and what perhaps is a bit more biased could be. So founders worried forcing virtue by law would violate your conscience, in that, yes, they wanted the country to be moral, who wouldn't? But at the same time, they did not want the founders, the framers of the Constitution is who we're talking about. They did not want to tell people this is what you should do. And history shows fights over what's moral, like prohibition or school topics, right? And even masking, right? Seatbelts were installed. We need to understand that is in our foundation. Slavery. You can't tell me that I can't have slaves. Prohibition. School topics. Now we're dealing with the LGBTQIA and people saying this is not a moral thing, so it shouldn't be taught in school, or I should be able to opt my child out of this. Faith and identity was used to define enemies. For example, the Cold War. Communists were seen as the devil. We demonize people who we feel are enemies. Early leaders warned moral decay invited threats. Republicans framed socialism and communism as moral evils. Today, some Christian nationalists see LGBTQ or secular views as threats over a pattern of shifting from collective goals to individual focus. Framers aim to unite the states and social classes under shared moral codes to create a stable republic, right? If you have similar beliefs, you're going to be more stable. The Republican Party tracks the GOP shift from collective investments like colleges, infrastructures, to laissez-faire, which is let them do what they want. Basically, the least amount of government interference. Focus on individual responsibility, especially post-20s and in the Reagan era. Star-Spangled Jesus explores how faith communities shifted from collective identity to pushing personal beliefs and individual salvation, standing alone in your convictions. Patriotism. The moral decay would weaken the country. Less moderate. So this was written by a moderate Republican. And then you had Falwell come in, and Reagan was elected largely due to the Christian right. But it's important to remember that there is a shift with the moral majority starting toward at that time. The natives, and when it comes to people of color, all those issues kind of go by the wayside. Like when we're talking about government, we are talking about white government. We're talking about white people and mainly white men. So we have to realize that until the 1960s, policy was shaped based on that. So everything, when you read a book, you have to remember that's where the policy, that was the framework. So for example, the natives, both parties were wrong. Republicans wanted to exterminate and Democrats wanted to assimilate. Now the Democrats saw themselves, or that take to assimilate was seen as virtuous and moral, but they were both wrong. Slavery and that whole thing, and I'm going to do a series on Reconstruction because that was really, slavery was terrible, but fixing it did not happen. For right or wrong, when our country was founded, this is what it was founded on. There were no Muslims faith. There was no Unitarian faith. There's no Hindu faith. There's no Buddhist faith. It was white Protestant faith. One other thing I want to bring up that I thought was interesting is that in 2016, Franklin Graham, if you know your Graham was a big deal. Well, Franklin Graham's his son now. When Trump got elected in 2016, he said something to the effect of God's will has been done. So the only thing new about the rage happening under the banner of Christianity was where it was aimed. Trump found a way to harness something that had been there for years and wield it for his own political gain. When he and so many right-wing talking heads touted the lie the election was stolen, it echoed through congregations eager to take up arms for a righteous cause, right? He was persecuted. He was persecuted. Repressed anger builds over time until it can no longer be contained. Christian nationalists finally had a place to release it. I believe that was one of the initial draws of Trump in that crowded Republican primary field of 2016. This is April Joy. She was in that community then. I liked these two quotes. One, these are by Republicans. This is by McKinley. Immunity should be granted to none who violate the laws, whether individuals, corporations, or communities. And one of the things that I find interesting is he was interested in justice for corporations as well. That corporations, individuals, no matter who you were, everybody should be held accountable the same. We have Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower was a general, and he was very popular. And he said, he was a general before he became president. He delicately sought to keep Americans secure while avoiding conflict or huge military budgets. Now we have our military budget is our biggest piece of the pie that we pay into as taxpayers. That's why we have so much influence. Many of the problems came from overspending in the government, and that's where this book ends. So this book is in my shop, link in bio. This book's in my shop, link in bio. Food for thought. What do you think? If anything, it gives us clues. We have to understand our roots to have an understanding of what's happening today. And most importantly, it's relevant as taxpayers. We have to know what happened to know what's happening today so we know what we're paying for. Stay awesome.